thought I would read today Soulless, a novel of vampires, werewolves, and parasols, story by Gail Carriger, illustrated by Jensen Eckwall. And this will be our main character. And this is a really gorgeous illustrated copy. This is the first in the Parasol Protector series. Chapter 1, in which parasols prove useful. Miss Alexa Terabody was not enjoying her evening. Private balls were never more than middling amusements for spinsters, and Miss Terabody was not the kind of spinster who could garner even that much pleasure from the event. To put the pudding in the puff, she had retreated to the library, her favorite sanctuary in any house, only to happen upon an unexpected vampire. She glared at the vampire. For his part, the vampire seemed to feel that their encounter had improved his ball experience immeasurably. For there she sat without escort in a low-necked ball gown. In this particular case, what he did not know could hurt him. For Miss Alexa was born without a soul, which, as any decent vampire of good breeding knew, meant she was a lady to avoid most assiduously. Yet he moved towards her, darkly shimmering out of the library shadows with feeding fangs ready. However, the moment he touched Miss Terabody, he was suddenly no longer darkly doing anything at all. He was simply standing there, the faint sound of a string quartet in the background as he foolishly fished about with his tongue for fangs that were unaccountably mislaid. Miss Terabody was not in the least surprised. Soullessness always neutralized supernatural abilities. She issued the vampire a very dour look. Certainly, most daylight folks wouldn't peg her as anything less than a standard English prig. But had this man not even bothered to read the vampire official abnormality roster in London and its greater environs? The vampire recovered his equanimity quickly. He reared away from Alexa, knocking over a nearby tea trolley. Physical contact broken. His fangs reappeared. Clearly not the sharpest of prongs, he then darted forward from the neck like a serpent, diving in for another chomp. "I say," said Alexa to the vampire, "we have not been introduced." Miss Terabody had never actually had a vampire try to bite her. She knew one or two by reputation, of course, and was friendly with Lord Akaldama, who was not friendly with Lord Akaldama. But no vampire had ever actually attempted to feed on her before. So Alexa, who abhorred violence, was forced to grab the miscreant by his nostrils, a delicate and therefore painful area, and shove him away. He stumbled over the fallen tea trolley, lost his balance in a manner astonishingly graceless for a vampire, and fell to the floor. He landed right on top of a plate of treacle tart. Miss Terabody was most distressed by this. She was particularly fond of treacle tart, and had been looking forward to consuming that precise plateful. She picked up her parasol. It was terribly tasteless for her to be carrying a parasol at an evening ball, but Miss Terabody rarely went anywhere without it. It was a style entirely of her own devising, a black frilly confection with purple satin pansies sewn about, brass hardware, and buckshot in its silver tip. She whacked the vampire right on top of the head with it as he tried to extract himself from his newly intimate relationships with the tea trolley. The buckshot gave the brass parasol just enough heft to make a deliciously satisfying thunk. "Manners," instructed Miss Terabody. The vampire howled in pain and sat back down on the treacle tart. Alexa followed up her advantage with a vicious prod between the vampire's legs. His howl went quite a bit higher in pitch, and he crumpled into a fetal position, while Miss Terabody was a proper English young lady, aside from not having a soul and being half Italian. She did spend quite a bit more time than most young ladies reading, riding and walking, and therefore was unexpectedly strong. Miss Terrabody leapt forward, as much as one can leap in a full triple-layered underskirt, draped bustle, and ruffled taffeta top skirt, and bent over the vampire. He was clutching at his indelicate bits and writhing about. The pain would not last long, given his supernatural healing abilities, but it hurt most decidedly in the interim. Alexa pulled a long wooden hair stick out of her elaborate coiffure. Blushing at her own temerity, she ripped open his shirt front, which was cheap and overly starched, and poked at his chest, right over the heart. Miss Terrabody sported a particularly large and sharp hair stick. With her free hand, she made certain to touch his chest, as only physical contact would nullify his supernatural abilities. "Desist that horrible noise immediately," she instructed the creature. The vampire quit his squealing and lay perfectly still. His beautiful blue eyes watered slightly as he stared fixedly at the wooden hair stick, or as Alexia liked to call it, hair stake. "Explain yourself," Miss Terrabody demanded, increasing the pressure. "Thousands apologies." The vampire looked confused. "Who are you?" Tentatively, he reached for his fangs. "Gone." To make her position perfectly clear, Alexia stopped touching him, though she kept her sharp hair stick in place. His fangs grew back. He gasped in amazement. "What are you?" "I thought you were a lady alone. It would be my right to feed if you were left this carelessly unattended. Please, do not. I did not mean to presume." He lisped around his fangs, real panic in his eyes. Alexia, finding it hard not to laugh at the lisp, said, "There is no cause for you to be so overly dramatic. Your hive queen will have told you of my kind." She returned her hand to his chest. The vampire's fangs retracted. And here's our image of the fight and the treacle tart. He looked at her as though she had suddenly sprouted whiskers and hissed at him. Miss Terrabody was surprised. Supernatural creatures, be they vampires, werewolves, or ghosts, owed their existence to an overabundance of soul, an excess that refused to die. Most knew that others like Miss Terrabody existed, born without any soul. The establishment of the Bureau of Unnatural Registry, BUR, a division of Her Majesty's Civil Services, called her ilk preternatural. Alexia thought the term nicely dignified. What vampires called her was far less complimentary. After all, preternaturals had once hunted them, and vampires have long memories. Naturally, daylight persons were kept in the dark, so to speak, but any vampire worth his blood should know a preternatural's touch. This one's ignorance was untenable. Alexia said, as though to a very small child, "I am a preternatural." The vampire looked embarrassed. "Oh, of course you are," he agreed, obviously still not quite comprehending. "Again, my apologies, lovely one. I'm overwhelmed to meet you. You are my first—" He stumbled over the word. "Preternatural?" He frowned. "No, not supernatural. Not natural, of course. How foolish of me not to see the dichotomy." His eyes narrowed into craftiness. He was now studiously ignoring the hair stick and looking tenderly into Alexia's face. Miss Terrabody knew full well her own feminine appeal. The kindest compliment her face could ever hope to garner was exotic, never lovely. Not that it had ever received either. Alexia figured that vampires, like all predators, were at their most charming when cornered. The vampire's hand shot forward, going for her neck. Apparently, he had decided if he could not suck her blood, strangulation was an acceptable alternative. Alexia jerked back, at the same time pressing her hair stick into the creature's white flesh. It slid in about half an inch. The vampire reacted with a desperate wiggle that, even without superhuman strength, unbalanced Alexia in her heeled velvet dancing shoes. She fell back. He stood, roaring in pain, with her hair stick half in and half out of his chest. Miss Terrabody scrambled for her parasol, rolling about indelicately among the tea things, hoping her new dress would miss the fallen foodstuffs. She found the parasol and came upright, swinging it in a wide arc. Purely by chance, the heavy tip struck the end of her wooden hair stick, driving it straight into the vampire's heart. The creature stood shock still, a look of intense surprise on his handsome face. Then he fell backwards onto the much-abused plate of treacle tart. Flopping in a limp, overcooked asparagus kind of way, his alabaster face turned a yellowish gray, as though he had been afflicted with jaundice, and he went still. Alexa's books called The End of a Vampire's Life disanimation. Alexia, who thought the action astoundingly similar to a souffle going flat, decided at that moment to call it the Grand Collapse. She intended to waltz directly out of the library without anyone the wiser to her presence there. This would have resulted in the loss of her best hair stick and her well-deserved tea, as well as a good deal of drama. Unfortunately, a small group of young dandies came traipsing in at that precise moment. What young men of such dress were doing in the library was anyone's guess. Alexa found the most likely explanation was that they had become lost while looking for the card room. Regardless, their presence forced her to pretend that she too had just discovered the dead vampire. With a resigned shrug, she screamed and collapsed into a faint. She stayed resolutely fainted, despite the liberal application of smelling salts, which made her eyes water most tremendously, a cramp in the back of one knee, and the fact that her new ball gown was getting most awfully wrinkled. All in many layers of green trim, picked to the height of the fashion in lightning shades to complementary crusade bodice, was being crushed into oblivion under her weight. The expected noises ensue, a good deal of yelling, much bustling about, and several loud clatters as one of the housemaids cleared away the fallen tea. Then came the sound she half anticipated, half dreaded. An authoritarian voice cleared the library of both young dandies and all other interested parties who had flowed into the room upon discovering the tableau. A voice instructed everyone to get out, while he gained the particulars from the young lady, in a tone that brooked no refusal. Silence descended. Mark my words, I will use something much, much stronger than smelling salts, came a growl in Miss Terrabody's left ear. The voice was low and tinged with a hint of Scotland. It would have caused Alexia to shiver and think primal monkey thoughts about moons and running fast and far, if she had had a soul. Instead, it caused her to sigh in exasperation and sit up. And good evening to you, Lord Macon. Lovely weather we're having this time of year, is it not? She patted her hair, which was threatening to fall down without the hair stick in its proper place. Surreptitiously, she looked around for Lord Colonel Macon's second-in-command, Professor Lyle. Lord Macon tended to maintain a much cooler temper when his beta was present. But then, as Alexia had come to comprehend, that appeared to be the main role of the beta, especially one to Lord Macon. Ah, Professor Lyle, how nice to see you again, she smiled in relief. Professor Lyle, the beta in question, was a slight, sandy-haired gentleman of indeterminate age and pleasant disposition, as agreeable, in fact, as his alpha was sour. He grinned at her and doffed his hat, which was of first-class design and a sensible material. His cravat was similarly subtle, but it was tied expertly, and the knot was a humble one. Miss Terrabody, how delightful to find ourselves in your company once more. His voice was soft and mild-mannered. Stop humoring her, Rudolph, barked Lord Macon. The fourth Earl of Wolsey was much larger than Professor Lyle, and in possession of a near permanent frown. Or at least he always seemed to be frowning when he was in the presence of Miss Alexa Terrabody. Ever since that hedgehog incident, which really, honestly, had not been her fault, he also had unreasonably pretty tawny eyes, mahogany-colored hair, and a particularly nice nose. The eyes were currently glaring at Alexia from a shockingly intimate distance. Why is it, Miss Terrabody, every time I have to clean up a mess in a library, you just happen to be in the middle of it? The Earl demanded of her. And we will stop there. I hope you enjoyed the first little few pages of Soulless. It is one of my favorite books. We do have it available in the system as an ebook, an audiobook, and a print copy. There is this illustrated version available, and it has also been turned into a graphic novel. Thank you.